There will be times when he doesn't answer our questions. And so we're faced with a choice. Do you keep trusting or do you turn your back on him? Do you keep submitting or do you rebel against him? Sometimes faith in God and the fear of God means having him without answers, and him without answers being enough.
So maybe you're one that would like to be happy. I want to be happy and try to be happy, but somehow you just can't be happy. Well, this is cool. I didn't think about this, but the writer of Ecclesiastes did it all. Everything the modern world promises will bring joy. And yet he never was satisfied and was, discontent. And all of the things that he got didn't bring him any happiness at all. In fact, Ecclesiastes, I think, is sort of a book of futility. So it's interesting. We're going to learn how to be happy. So this is awesome. We've got Bobby Jamieson with us. He began his careers. This is cool. As a jazz saxophonist?
True.
That's awesome.
Fantastic.
I love that. So we're talking like Kenny G or more?
John Coltrane, Charlie Parker, Dexter Gordon,
Okay.
Stuff like that.
That's more my style. I like that. That's cool. And you're now the pastor of Trinity Baptist Church in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, where you're the senior pastor there. So the book is Everything is Never Enough, Ecclesiastes, The Surprising Path to Resilient Happiness. Welcome to the podcast.
Good to be with you. Thank you.
It's good to have you.
I love this, Hank. I love how Ecclesiastes starts out with meaningless.
Yep.
You're a brave one if you go beyond that, I think. So this is going to be a great conversation.
Absolutely. Now, speaking of happiness, you say that there are two terms regarding happiness. Give those to us.
Well, I think I say there's two ways to be unhappy. As in the beginning of the book, one is to not get what you most want.
Oh.
The other is to get everything you want but find it's not enough. That's kind of a negative way to put it. But Ecclesiastes' main word for happiness is actually just rejoicing, which means it's sort of enjoying something in the moment. It's not like it's a project you can construct for yourself and carefully plan and achieve, and it's going to pay off here, and you can sort of, watch the returns start coming in year on year. The main way Ecclesiastes talks positively about being happy is enjoying or rejoicing, which is something you can only do right now.
Mm.
That's true. I was talking about the objective happiness and subjective.
Oh,
and I didn't quite understand what does that mean?
Oh, fair enough. Good point. Yeah, so early in the book, basically, you could think about happiness essentially just as feeling good and having a good time. Kind of happiness is whatever works for you that makes you tick. And so subjective meaning it just varies with each individual. And it's all about having a good time and feeling good. But if you say objective, what you mean is there's something out there about how humans should really live. And so to say someone is happy involves more than just feeling good. It has to involve an element of being good, doing good. There's some kind of good really out there for human beings. And so in that sense, subjective and objective, Ecclesiastes basically investigates both, finds the subjective on its own is not enough. And what it does say about happiness involves more of the objective. There is a kind of good God means for us to have. He means for us to live. And in some part of happiness is figuring that out and discovering that.
I like that. There's a way to live that brings more happiness than the other way. I guess we could say it that way.
Yeah.
So let's talk about why did you write this book? What was your goal?
Yeah, well, Ecclesiastes, Sally, you got to this right at the beginning. It's such a challenging book. It opens with this bracing declaration that kind of demolishes everything. Everything is meaningless or vain or futile. Ecclesiastes is such a deep book. It goes to the heart of everything. It goes to the heart of our dreams, our aspirations. It goes to the heart of the things we chase throughout life. It's one of these books that kind of grabs you by the lapels and won't let you go. And so I preached through it at the church where I used to be one of the pastors in Washington, D.C. And the sermons were very gripping for me. I think they were very gripping for the congregation. When I was done, I just didn't want to be done with the book. And I thought, what if there's a way to kind of distill the main point of the book and to aim it at modern issues, modern experiences, kind of our quest for happiness and the good life. So the book sort of got a hold of me and didn't let go. And I felt like the author, Kohelet, was not done talking to me, saying stuff to me. He's kind of a weird character. He's a little bit gloomy. He's a little bit angular. He's always bringing up stuff you don't really want to talk to him about. But for some reason, this weird, morose, philosophical author of maybe the hardest book in the Bible, I just wanted to keep hanging out with him.
So you just mentioned this guy's name, and I think a lot of people thought it was Solomon. Now, what is the name again?
Sure. Well, a lot of readers throughout history have assumed the book is written by Solomon, and it may well be, but it never explicitly says Solomon. He introduces himself as Kohelet. It's a Hebrew word that means someone who gathers up a group, leads the group, and the implication is teaching. So that's why it's often translated the teacher or the preacher. Now, it could well be Solomon. Solomon writes all these proverbs. Solomon is a teacher of wisdom. Solomon did have quite a massive kind of rise and fall type narrative to his life. But I just stick with Kohelet in the book because that's how he describes himself.
I
It
love
kind of
that.
makes sense. Oh, you go ahead, Sally.
No, I just love that whole idea that, even the writer of Ecclesiastes is a bit of a mystery.
That's right. He kind of preserves some mystery. He talks about all these experiences, but he never fully identifies himself outright.
Mm.
It kind of makes sense why you would think it's Solomon because, I mean, the guy had everything. And so if there's anybody that could say, I've done it all, got the T-shirt, and it didn't work, I get that.
That's right. Yep. Yeah, fair enough.
Love it. Just thinking about how could we possibly organize our thoughts around Ecclesiastes? Because it's like an uphill down, it's like a roller coaster, if you will. And you found a way. Tell us about the 3-story building theory that you have.
Yeah, so this kind of dawned on me late in preaching through the book and with the help of some scholars. But one of the biggest challenges in the book is that Kohelet looks out at all of life. He's looking at work, money, possessions, wealth, relationships, sex, all these different things you could strive after to try to have a fulfilling life. And a whole lot of the book, he is saying, this stuff's not going to make you happy. It's not going to last. Even if you deserve it, you're not going to get it. Even if you get it, it's not going to satisfy you, and it's all going to disappear anyways. That's a big chunk of the book, and his main word for pronouncing that verdict or judgment is the Hebrew word hevel. You could translate that as meaningless, vain, even absurd. And so that's a pretty bleak kind of deconstruction. These things won't make you happy. But then he also, at 7 key points in the book, he looks at a lot of the same stuff: work, toil, wealth, possessions, marriage. And he pronounces them good. He pronounces them a gift. He says things like, there's nothing better. He says things like, so I commend joy. He says things like, go eat your bread with joy and drink your wine with a merry heart, for God has already approved what you do. So what's the difference? He's looking at the same stuff, but he sees something very different. And I think one of the keys is that when he's looking at the world and pronouncing it hevel or absurd, he's just looking at what you can observe and experience and understand just by living life. When he's looking at all the same stuff again, but he pronounces it a gift, he's looking at it through the lens of the reality that everything comes from God. God created everything. God is the source of everything. God is the one ordaining and planning our lives and giving us the different gifts and blessings and burdens that we have. And when you look at it all through that lens, you begin to treat it differently. You begin to receive it thankfully. You begin to stop trying to control everything and kind of gripping it and holding onto it as tight as you can, which has a tendency more to kind of crush and break things rather than receiving them open-handedly as a gift from the Lord. So I came upon this idea of a 2-story building. Look, he's looking at the same stuff, but he's seeing something different. And so there are these 2 stories. On the ground floor, it's hevel or absurd. The second floor, you climb up higher, you see farther. You see everything as a gift. But there's also a 3rd story that's more like a skyscraper where you go up a huge elevator really fast, gain a ton of elevation. He doesn't go there for all that long. But he actually, in a few key places, looks at life in light of eternity. We are going to answer to God. There is going to be a judgment that sets everything right in this world. He sees
Hmm.
injustice, he sees oppression, he sees things that look humanly unfixable, but he confesses there is a time, there is a day coming when everyone will give an account to God. And that actually brings hope. Because the only way to solve the problem Kohelet sees, like in present injustice in this world, is if the judgment's actually going to bring true and perfect justice, if that's actually going to be good news for a completely transformed world. So, a three-story building, ground floor,
Hmm.
absurd, second floor, gift, third floor, you see everything beyond in the light of eternity. And so, even though the book has this start and stop, he kind of switches lanes, switches lenses without telling you, it's not really explicit in the book's order. I would argue that's the kind of structure of thought that helps hold the book together.
Yeah, I love it. It kind of goes back to the wisdom of my mom. What is your point of view? And is it a short term or is it a long term? And let's kind of turn the camera a little bit and look at the long term view of life as a pathway to ultimately being with Jesus forever. And isn't that our main goal, which helps takes us past the roller coaster downs and reminding us that there's always the pathway back up again. So I've always ultimately thought the author of Ecclesiastes, or the takeaway, was that there is hope and happiness. In,
Yes, the,
as you're studied this so thoroughly, what's your takeaway
Yeah,
ultimately?
absolutely. Well, I think all three of those levels of the book have a message to preach to
Hmm.
us. So
Yeah.
we shouldn't put our ultimate hopes in anything in this life because it's not
Mm-hmm.
going to satisfy us. That's the message from the first floor. But the message from the second floor is you will get more enjoyment. You will get more joy out of the good things God has given you if you receive them thankfully, if you look to God for them, and if you don't wrap up your whole heart in them, but you are fully present to them as the small good things they are from the Lord. And even then, on the third floor, that kind of glimpse of eternity, all the more so in light of the fact that we'll answer to God, all the more so in light of the fact that a judgment is coming. There, we should ultimately put our hope in God and not in anything in this world. So I would say, kind of getting those three messages, letting them sit by side, learning to kind of put all those together is the big takeaway.
Love that.
What, Bobby? What is an Ecclesiastes? Is that plural of something? Is that a group of people? Is that what?
Oh,
Oh, is it?
it's because it comes it's because we're gonna have to get a little bit into the nerdy weeds here, but it's because that's the Greek translation of the Hebrew word kohelet, just brought over into English. Like you might know
Okay,
The Greek word ekklesia for assembly, which is the
right.
main New Testament word for church. It's because kohelet is an assembler of people. He brings people together and teaches them. And Ecclesiastes is just literally the Greek noun for someone who does that, an assembler of people.
That makes sense. I
Yeah.
like that.
Hmm.
So the writer of Ecclesiastes, who says that all that comes is absurd, it's interesting how you can get caught up in the negative and maybe never see the positive.
You can. I mean, some interpreters do take the book that way, and sometimes they
Yeah.
even, because they don't see the kind of gift theme as having its own force in the book, it almost sounds like a counsel of despair. Like, well, if that's the best we can do, let's just eat and drink for tomorrow we die, type of thing. Or it can be, if you don't really see the hope within the book, you can have a tough time accepting the kind of demolition work the author really sets out to do. If he's this must be some sort of skeptical, unbelieving, like, take this with a grain of salt. It's kind of this dangerous book that comes like vacuum sealed in the Bible with a warning on it. So I do think it's a hard book because of the different directions it pushes us in. On the one hand, you got to sit there patiently and let it do surgery on you. Where am
Hmm.
I tempted to load up too much hopes in this earthly good? You got to sit there patiently and let Ecclesiastes, the surgeon, take his scalpel and show your own heart to you. And yet, he doesn't end there. He doesn't stop there.
And he's somebody who's experienced a lot of things. You'd have to know, the things that you're striving for are futile. Uh, Probably experienced loss, and talks about that. This past summer, my wife and I, we have a special needs daughter who is now in heaven,
Mm,
and doctors basically she ended up in the hospital and just never left.
mm,
Actually, no, that's wrong. We took her home twice and had to bring her back to the hospital immediately.
mm,
But and so I think that people have gone through something like that can see how a lot of things are just vain and what really is important. And so I'm hoping that it's given me a better view of what really to put priorities on. And I guess you talk to a lot of, I guess they've done surveys of people that are on their deathbed, and the most important thing they talk about is people
mm,
and God, and how a lot of the stuff you pursued, it didn't matter.
mhm. That's
You
right.
know, yeah,
That's right.
So,
A lot of people on their deathbed wind up echoing, even unknowingly, some of that wisdom of Ecclesiastes, for sure.
and a
yep,
lot of those little lows seem so much smaller, I would imagine, at that moment when you're about to be face to face with Jesus for the rest of your
mm,
life. I
Hmm.
yep,
just, yeah, you have to live for that. And I think a lot of things that happen in our lives can um some of us who've been through some really difficult things. I lost my sister to addiction. I was very, very sick until I was 16 years old. And I think it does give you a different perspective, and you can actually look at it from that point of view. Like you're saying that there is joy to be found. And once you've experienced one of those deep dips, there our whole perspective can have a shift or a change in how we see things. So back to that POV, our point of view is so very important. So maybe that's why he just smacks us in the face with his very first words that I was just looking at it again this morning. Meaningless, meaningless. I'm like, how do you get past those first two words? But maybe that's one of the ways, just knowing Abby and your love and Becky's love for her and your son Sam as well, just having had the privilege of walking through that with you and your family, Kankel Fritz. I hadn't really put all that together as far as an outlook from the Ecclesiastes point of view, but wow, I can really see that there's hope on the other side of those dips in life. And maybe that's what Kohelet, you said you can pronounce it. Go
Kohelet,
yell it.
it's like that. I mean,
Go yell it.
go yell
Had
it.
in mind. Yeah.
I think one of the most deeply insightful aspects of Ecclesiastes is that it helps put all of our individual losses, some of which are devastating, some of
Mm.
which are just life-shattering. It puts them in the context of the whole world's brokenness because of our fall into sin. I mean, I think that's kind of the dominant note in those darker, harder passages is life is absurd and we don't get what we want because this world is under God's curse because of our sin. Life is hard and full of suffering because God subjected the world to futility. We have this disconnect. Why is there this disconnect between what our hearts constantly long for and what the world gives us? That disconnect came into the world when Adam and Eve sinned and God cursed the world. And so on the one hand, the bad news is all this brokenness runs way deeper than you might have initially suspected. But then that leaves room for there to be good news. If this world was originally good and whole, and is itself a gift of God and remains a gift of God, but the world has been plunged into ruin, futility, waste, absurdity. Well, if it is good and has been broken, that implies someone can fix it. And so I think part of what Ecclesiastes does for us is by naming and describing and kind of sitting in so many of those hardships and frustrations, it helps us see, wait a minute, those are actually a clue to what's wrong with this whole thing. And we know the one who, in the death and resurrection of Jesus, has begun to fix it.
Oh, that's amazing. Kind of leads into my next question about control. You talk about what lessons we can learn about control when we study Ecclesiastes. And yeah, I don't think there's much we can, but tell us about that.
Well, there isn't much we can, but our fallen human hearts make us always want to
Keep
control as
trying.
much as we can. We keep
Yep.
trying. And And one of Ecclesiastes' other most famous sayings that comes up again and again is like in chapter 1, verse 14, all is vanity and a striving after wind. Right? So striving after wind is Ecclesiastes' condemnation of our effort to control. You want to like throw a net around the wind? Do you want to try to lasso it? What are you going to do? Capture it, make it do what you want? I think Ecclesiastes' sort of judgment, all is a striving after wind, is actually a judgment on our effort to control everything. And one of the themes I get into in the book is that in the modern world where we've used science to kind of give us more and more and more mastery over things, where we're more able to control our environments, what we live in, our bodies, what we're exposed to. Even, it is exactly 70 degrees in this room right now because I have a thermostat on. The more we try to control, the more frustrated we are about what we can't control. And in a way, the less prepared we are spiritually, emotionally, to come up against those things we can't control. It's kind of like if your default setting is, I can control this, I can control this, I can control this. Whenever you come up against something you well and truly can't control, you'll be shattered, you'll be undone.
Mm,
And so all of our kind of modern technology, skills, science, the way we've kind of built the modern world actually sort of sets us up to fall deeper and deeper into a mindset where we think we can control everything. And then we've
Mm.
got another thing coming.
Yeah.
yeah, that's for sure.
Speaking of perspective, Kenk, I'm thinking of your recent trip with Compassion, and look at the world that you entered over there compared to what we are in. And I imagine you can speak to a vast difference of the thought of control.
Oh, yeah, it's true. And it's night
Yeah.
and day. Well, let's just start with the original thing of how did you get here to where you were born?
Mm.
There's no control over that. They couldn't control where they were born, or you can be born into a little more of a privilege or not. And but you're right. I don't know. There's a lot that you can't control.
Mm.
Let's talk about what can we learn about time.
Mm.
Yeah, Ecclesiastes has some very beautiful, famous kind of poetic reflections on this. Chapter 3, there's a time for everything. For everything, there's a season and a time for every matter under heaven, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to pluck up what is planted, and so on. That beautiful poem.
Mhm.
I think time, what can we learn about time? We learn from Ecclesiastes that God is sovereign over all of our times. We learned that we have very little control over many of our times. We learn that, in a sense, the things we want to get in time or get from time are so consistently frustrated because either it doesn't come in the first place or it doesn't last, because once we get it, it goes by too quickly. And so, in a sense, time, it's very humbling. Again, this kind of illusion that we're masters, that we're in charge, that we're in control. If you sit down and think about time for just a second, it's humbling. We realize time's like a river and we're kind of bobbing along in it.
Mm-hmm.
We're
Yep.
we're not shaping it. We're not, dictating its flow, turning it on and off like the controls of a dam or something. Time is flowing on and we are along for the ride, and have much less control over the things we want than we might think. And so there's part of kind of reconciling ourselves to time is realizing, that it puts us in our place. We don't put it in its place. And
Yeah.
ultimately, there's some comfort, even in the kind of bleaker parts of Ecclesiastes. There is some comfort in knowing God's the one doing this. So we don't rage against it. Even from Ecclesiastes kind of bleak statements. Yep, there's going to be a time for love and a time to hate, and you can't really do anything about it. Still, right after that, it goes on to say things like, chapter 3, verse 14, I perceived that whatever God does endures forever. Nothing can be added to it, nor anything taken
Mm.
from it. God has done it so that people should fear before him. He's the author writing this story. He's the one who's in charge. And so when it comes to dealing with loss, dealing with hardship, dealing with frustration, already we should be able to say, I'm not going to buck against this or kick against this or rage against this. I'm going to, like Job, I'm going to learn to accept it from the Lord's hand. He's the one doing this.
I like that. I like the idea that, if what God does lasts for eternity, then why don't we figure out what God is doing, join him there? That way you're spending your time doing something that's eternal.
Yeah, there is, I do think Ecclesiastes has some sense of the good things we do matter for eternity. Absolutely.
Right.
There's a positive reckoning of the things we invest in. God will recognize those, honor those. There's a positive side to the accounting of the final judgment. But there's also, the main note it strikes over and over again, like in chapter 3, verse 11, he has made everything beautiful in its time. Also, he has put eternity into man's heart, yet so that he cannot find out what God has done from the beginning to the end. There's always this sense of wanting bigger answers. Well, Lord, why this? Why now? Why are you
Hmm.
letting me go through this? And the New Testament sheds much more light, say, on God's purposes for ordaining trials for us, to test our faith and to develop patience, and for patience to have its perfect work in us, like in James 1. But Ecclesiastes much more emphasizes the things we don't know, the things we can't know. And honestly, sometimes, especially in the face of a major loss, there is actually some comfort in that. It's not like there's some magic answer. It's not like there's, oh, well, this happened because. Sometimes it's just accepting the loss from the Lord's hand too and continuing to trust Him, continuing to yearn for Him, continue to have our hearts go out to Him, even when He's taking away some of what we most have loved.
Yeah, that's here at the radio station. We have people call in all the time that have suffered a tragedy, and I can tell when they're talking to me, they're trying to say that God did it because of this or because of that. And I know that probably a good chunk of the time we're putting words in his mouth, but I think that we just want an answer, even to the degree that we're like, well, this is why it happened. you know, I feel like it feels good to have a reason, and we may never get the real reason.
Yeah, that's right. And in a number of places, Ecclesiastes really hammers this idea that we don't get all the answers to all the
Yeah.
questions we ask. And part of what it means to fear God is to trust that it is better to have Him without answers than to have answers without Him. There will be
Mm,
times there will be times when he doesn't answer our questions. And so we're faced with a
yep.
choice. Do you keep trusting or do you turn your back on him? Do you keep submitting or do you rebel against him? Sometimes faith in God and the fear of God means having him without answers, and him without answers being enough.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's not easy. That's for sure. That's
It's
for
not
sure.
easy.
Yeah.
Mm-mm.
So, question for you: in the light of all is vanity, should we pursue pleasure? Is pleasure bad?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Ecclesiastes again kind of has a both sides here. On the one hand, pleasure is a terrible god, and if you're investing all your hopes for happiness in pleasure, it will be a always disappearing horizon. It'll always be just one more thing, one next more around the bend, next mountain peak to try to climb up to. And so if you're directly chasing pleasure, yeah, that doesn't end well. That's what leads into addiction. And we all know about cycles of addiction. You give more and more and you get less and less. And so if you're chasing pleasure as any kind of ultimate good, it begins to take on that structure of an addiction. So pleasure can't be ultimate. Pleasure can't be primary. On the other hand, this is where we go from the ground floor up to the second floor. Ecclesiastes has lots of good stuff to say about enjoyment, about pleasure. Like in chapter 5, verse 18. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him, for this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil, this is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life, because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. Now, one basic way to kind of tell the difference. How do you tell the difference between the wrong chasing after pleasure that makes you a slave of pleasure and the right receiving these things as good gifts from God that give you pleasure? Is basically that posture of chasing versus
Mm,
receiving. What has God already given you that you can enjoy? What has God already put in your life that you can take pleasure in? And oftentimes, what happens is you can learn to enjoy more and learn to enjoy better the things God has already given you. There is unused pleasure possibility in a whole lot of the stuff God has already put in your life, whether family or friendships or work or even just food. For me, I was just thinking about this lately. One of our daughters is big into soccer. She's getting really good at it, really committed. She's all in, and she's our first child who's gotten big into any sport. Our first child to play any sport whatsoever. You know, Millions of American parents have experienced the joys and trials of childhood athletics. But this is
That's true.
I've been a parent for 15 years, and this is my first time, so it's very fresh. And what could be more mundane than like driving 40 minutes because it's an away game, sitting on the sideline for a half hour while they warm up, watching the kids play for 2 half-hour halves, and then driving home. The most mundane, basic, boring American parent experience that
Yeah.
there is. But if you really show up for it, if you're really present, there's more and more and more to enjoy in it. The way the kids are
Mm.
communicating, the way it's building confidence, the way they're turning into friends out there on the field, the way their skills, you can see it emerge game by game, season by season. Even just the weather. I mean, we are in North Carolina. It is beautiful. There's pine trees all around the fields my daughter's playing on. You might not always have that wherever you are. But even something so mundane and basic as a Saturday soccer game on a Saturday, there's something about humbling yourself to not wish you were doing something else or getting something
Mm.
bigger or better, and just fully investing yourself in that moment as a gift from God.
Wow.
Sally, I guess we're hearing we probably shouldn't be on our phones during that time. Just
Watch
what
the
I
game. Watch the game.
Be in, be focused, ride the wave with them because,
Yeah.
like we've been talking about, those games are a definite up and down. But if you look for, and if you hear somebody talk and looking back on their sports situations in the past, there will be a smile probably on their face
Mhm.
because you'll remember the good
Yeah.
times. You'll remember the relationships. You won't remember the score of the game. And parents need to remember that. And we need to have a stern talking to my husband about that very thing, but we will move on. That's another day. Oh my goodness.
Somebody
Sounds
else.
like you.
Somebody else is the Christians and sports expert. I'm just the Ecclesiastes guy.
Oh my gosh. I wish I had that comeback when he was pacing the sidelines with my son because we were beyond that. But wow, that's what I remember. I was like, just go sit down and smile.
Chill.
Oh, so funny. Speaking of that, just thinking about marriage relationships. And as you're talking, I'm thinking about those vows that we make, until death do we part. And yet, between the vow and death do we part, some of those lows that just are there. I think the greatest gift our pastor gave us when he married us, two very young people, he said there are going to be really down days, and you need to stick through those dips. Well, at that moment of I do for the rest of my life, we had no concept of the rest of our life, and I doubt most people do. And especially now, American weddings have turned into such a huge production. I think sometimes we are in jeopardy of going back to Ecclesiastes' very first words here, meaningless, meaningless. And too many marriages die when they don't really have to. I'm done preaching.
Well, marriage is one of those goods and gifts that Ecclesiastes commends. It's there in chapter
Mm-hmm.
9, verse 9. Enjoy life with the wife whom you love
Mm.
all the days of your absurd life that he has given you under the sun, because that is your portion in life and in your toil at which you toil under the sun. Now, there is a note of realism there, which is already
Mm-hmm.
kind of waking us up from sort of Hollywood dream ending type stuff. So there's a realism. When one exhortation I've started to give in wedding sermons much more frequently
Uh-huh.
is the wedding vows you're about to make are a blank check.
Mm.
You don't know what they will cost you or when those costs will come due. But just know you are signing up right now to give everything, to give whatever it takes, to give up whatever it takes. This is a blank check. And so I think one of the ways the kind of realism of Ecclesiastes can help us is that different fairly predictable seasons of life in terms of struggles with health and aging and this kind of thing. That's on the radar, that's on the horizon if God gives you those years. But also just the normal trials of life that everyone will get a different portion of will put strain on those vows. And you have to understand, yeah, the promise you've made is what binds you in to this is my lot. This person is my life. This, when you talk about a lot, you're talking about a determinate, fixed plot with boundaries. This
Mm.
is my limit. This husband, this wife. Yep. From here on out, this person is my portion in the sense of a covenant life partner. We are building a life together, period. And so I think the realism of Ecclesiastes can help us in that we shouldn't be surprised by hardship, we shouldn't be surprised by toil, futility, vanity. The key is how can you live together in such a way that you're contributing to each other's renewal and flourishing and being sustained and helping nurture the other person in a way back to health, whether that's physical
Mm.
health, spiritual health, emotional health. And so, yeah, Ecclesiastes, it's one of these enjoyment passages, but boy, you guys laughed when I read it because it takes a real dark turn. Like, enjoy life and all your absurd days at which you toil. But that's because the enjoyment comes in the midst of the toil. The
Yeah.
enjoyment comes in the midst of the absurdity. You can't have like a toil-free or absurdity-free enjoyment that lasts very long. If you do, you're just building a fantasy world to live in. And so, it's like I often think to myself, parenting is the art of being kind while tired. You know,
That's
Yeah.
good.
and in a way, marriage is the art of enjoyment amidst absurdity. There's going to be frustration, there's going to be futility, there's going to be vanity. You got to bring it all on board and figure out how can we enjoy each other, how can we build a life together, how can we enjoy the life together that God has given us despite all the absurdity, despite all the toil, and even in and amid the toil. That's the exhortation, is enjoying life amidst the toil. Marriage is a lot of toil. One framework I use, I think it's in the marriage chapter late in the book. So many things in life we do on the model of a quest. You're on a quest to find your one true love. You're on a quest to find a fulfilling career. You're on a quest for kind of self-realization, self-fulfillment. But so much of life, and especially marriage and parenting, it's really more of a toil of nurture, maintenance, sustaining day by day, little acts of kindness, little acts of tenderness, little acts of service. And it doesn't stop, it doesn't relent. You still got to do this much dishes the next day, no matter how much you did the day before. You still got to do this much laundry the next day, no matter how much you did the day before. You still have to bear the other person's burdens emotionally, no matter how much you did the day before. And all those acts of toiling at nurture sustain the soil of a healthy marriage that will lead to enjoyment and laughter and intimacy and all kinds of good stuff. You cannot treat marriage like a quest. However much you might have been on a quest to find your one true love, well, now once you have found them, the rest is toiling at nurture. And so you have to recognize, especially if you were maybe more of a romantic type, what got you here is not what's going to sustain you in it. It's like in politics, they talk about the difference between campaigning and governing. It's one thing to win votes, it's another thing to run a city or state or country. So, Ecclesiastes' realism about the absurdity, the toil, the hardship, actually, well, that's pretty much all of our long term relationships. That's pretty much all of our long term commitments. Even if you got your dream job, you get there and you discover, oh, it's a whole lot of toil and doing the same stuff every day over and over and over again. Great. I'm glad I got the dream job. Now I get to do the same thing 100 times a day every day. That is life under the sun.
So
Yep.
Solomon or Goyelet is there to tell us, you know what?
It-
Perfection comes when you go to meet the Lord. And in the meantime, we will toil. And but that is where you find joy. And it's up to us how we are going to see that. And God gives us that ability. We can be down in the dumps every single day and find somebody to complain about, or we can rejoice in the relationships He's given us and ride the ride all the way to Him. Be a witness for Him in that peace that passes understanding, if you will, in that joy that passes understanding, if you will. Because as you said, every one of us can tell a story about the hardships that we've been through or are going through. And until heaven, we will be tilling that soil.
Amen.
Yeah.
Hey, talk about how Ecclesiastes teaches us to fear God. Some people may misunderstand fear. I remember somebody was actually, a friend of mine was talking about it more like, I'm afraid of God. I don't know if they got the definition of fear in the right. Well, maybe they're right. What do you think?
Yeah, that's a great question. And Ecclesiastes does have a few exhortations to fear God. Chapter 5, verse 7, God is the one you must fear. And that's in the sense of reverence and examining yourself and submitting yourself to Him. Chapter 12, verse 1 doesn't use the word fear, but it's a similar exhortation. It's remember also your Creator in the days of your youth. So fearing God is putting ourselves in the right place in relation to him. He's the creator, we're the creatures. He's the Lord, we're the subjects. He's the boss, he gets to tell us what to do. And so I do think, I mean, I'd have to, it would probably take too long to kind of double click on your friend's fear. I'd have to talk to him. Well, why? Why are you afraid of God? And sometimes that could be from an insufficient sense of the blood of Christ is enough to cover all of our sins. And that's the kind of
Right.
fear where First John says perfect love casts out fear. Fear has to do with punishment. So there is a sense in which someone might have one aspect of a healthy fear of God because of his holiness, his majesty, his righteousness. But if you don't know that the blood of Jesus is enough to cover all of your sins, well, that'll lead to a kind of wrong or slave-like kind of fear. But when Ecclesiastes talks about fear, I think it's a sense of God's infinite majesty compared with our tiny creaturely dependence. And that should lead us to a sense of relying on Him, acknowledging Him, trusting in Him, obeying Him, and viewing Him, to put it as simply as possible, as a bigger deal than ourselves, as a bigger deal than anything in this world, as a bigger deal than any good we would seek, as a bigger deal than any suffering we would undergo. Whatever it is, God's a bigger deal. That's what it means to fear God, to give him more weight and gravity in your heart and in your mind, and in a way that then flows out in your words and actions.
I like that. And if you truly fear him in that way, your life should take a different turn because of the response to how in awe you are of him, how great and big as you were saying, he is. I think the more you think about that, meditate on that, well, gosh, it obviously deserves my attention.
Yeah, that's right. And when you fear God, he becomes an anchor for your soul.
Amen.
Ecclesiastes speaks so movingly about the changes of life, the things that fade away, the things, that are fleeting and transient. Well, God is that unmoving, totally fixed, unchanging rock to tie yourself to. And so when you fear him, that also means, yeah, you've got confidence in the face of trials, hardships, things changing that you really don't want
Mm-hmm.
to, because God is that unchanging fixed point in your life.
I love that.
Hmm.
Talk about how the gospel is presented in Ecclesiastes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. That's an interesting way to put it, because there is no direct kind of explicit gospel hope the way there would be like in Isaiah. With you think about Old Testament books, Isaiah with the suffering servant, or Jeremiah with the new covenant, or even Genesis with the promised one who's going to crush the serpent underfoot. Well, what is kind of the gospel according to Ecclesiastes? And I think the simplest way to say it is the gospel is the answer to Ecclesiastes' question.
Mm,
Ecclesiastes looks around at the brokenness of the world and goes, who can fix this?
yeah.
Ecclesiastes looks at all the things we can't know and say, well, who can tell you what's coming after you? Or even some of the negations or denials. Like in chapter 8, it says, no one has power over the day of death. So it's like death is a prison for us. If for a mortal human being, death is a prison. You can't lock it, you can't escape, you can't break out. You are in a cell called death, and you're just waiting until death executes its sentence. But then, of course, Jesus says in John chapter 10, I have power to lay my life down and I have power to
Yep.
take it up again. Nobody takes my life from me. So Jesus, in one sense, entered into the prison cell of death, but he did so in order to break himself out and in order to break out everybody who trusts in him and in order to demolish the whole thing forever. So Ecclesiastes, in one sense, sharpens our longing for the gospel by just all of these painful observations, questions, negations. It itself points vaguely and generally to that kind of horizon of eternity, but it doesn't tell us how to get there. So, in some ways, I think Ecclesiastes sort of serves up the gospel by stating our need for it as powerfully and beautifully as any book in the Old Testament, and by kind of stating our inability to fix this ourselves. It leaves us yearning, longing, crying out for, but then it takes the rest of the Bible to answer it. Ecclesiastes itself doesn't give us the answer.
Yeah.
I love that. Just as we're talking and looking at wrapping up this huge topic, um, I'm just impressed by how often I most likely am taking life for granted. I'm letting a lot of things pass by me by focusing on the things that I'm grumbling about. And believe me, I'm speaking to myself right now. It just, if Ecclesiastes starts out with meaningless, Sally needs to hear that because as you're talking, I'm hearing, I also have a choice. Am I going to look at the shortness that is the seemingly meaningless part of life? Or am I seeing the opportunity to be his witness all the way through, which ties into what Kenk just asked about where is the gospel in Ecclesiastes? And it is just popping out to me like a neon sign right now of the challenge that is before us. And gosh, God gives us the freedom. Are we going to see it as meaningless? Or are we going to see the opportunities that are right in front of us that one day we'll be on that deathbed and go, man, I missed it here, there, and everywhere else. And I don't want to be that person. Mm.
Yeah, Ecclesiastes, as far as taking life for granted, that's a
Mm-hmm.
great way to put kind of what it's taking aim at, because
Yeah.
we shouldn't take it for granted in the sense of, oh, this is just what it is. We should receive it as a gift. We should take it as granted by God. We
Mm.
should take it as given by him for our enjoyment and as bearing his love, his generosity, his affection toward us. Every gift bears a trace of its giver. And I just had one of my best friends, I just saw him a couple weeks ago, and he gave me a first edition of a book that he himself recommended to me that changed how I want to write and think about all kinds of things. It was one of the most meaningful books I've ever read. I read it because he told me to. And actually, reading that book helped in part lead to writing this one. And to celebrate this book coming out, he gave me a first edition of that book. It was Annie Dillard's Pilgrim at Tinker Creek. That gift tells me so much about the giver, his friendship, his love, and how well he knows me. Well, our lives and every good thing in them are that kind of a gift from a giver who knows us, a giver who loves us, a giver who's tailor made the kinds of gifts he's given. He's sort of hand picked, hand designed, made his own list, not only to give us life itself as a gift, but to give us every good thing we have. And so, in some ways, life as a gift is the ultimate kind of antidote to taking life for granted or taking any good thing for granted.
Mm.
Mm.
Good.
This is good stuff. So everything is never enough. Bobby, do you picture us reading this as a personal thing? Is this something that we could study along with the Bible or with a group, or how? What's the proper application here?
Sure, great question. Yeah, I do think it would be a good book for discussion. You'd probably want to go a few pages at a time because it gets a few chapters. I mean, like a few chapters at a time because it gets into such deep issues. So I think it could be a good group, a book, small group discussion, that kind of thing. Especially if you read it side by side with Ecclesiastes. All right, everybody, you got to read Ecclesiastes at least once as we work through the book, because the book doesn't go strictly in order through Ecclesiastes, though there is kind of a rough progression. I would also say one of the main uses of the book I would commend and encourage would be reading it one-on-one with a friend who's not a believer, especially if they're kind of spiritually open or seeking, because the whole first half of the book in surveying all these different realms of life is meant to connect with people's problems, frustrations, challenges, and kind of point to a deeper understanding and awareness of them. So I would say read it if you have kind of a thoughtful non-Christian friend who's open to kind of looking at what the Bible has to say about their life. I would say reading it side by side with them is one of the main recommendations I'd have.
Thank you for getting into it, because I don't know about you, Sally. It was one of those things where I'm doing my Bible in the year, and okay, I checked off Ecclesiastes. sounds like we need to take another look at what it's saying to us here.
Yes. And I love how you chose the word path to resilient happiness. There's so much in that word there, resilient. It indicates the meaninglessness that I keep going back to.
It has to survive life's absurdity. Your happiness has to hold up. It has to be able to take the brunt of life's absurdity and still keep going.
Yes, well done
good.
with that word there. Well done with your subtitle. Ecclesiastes, A Surprising Path to Resilient Happiness. It can be found, and that's what I'm reading there, but the responsibility is on me to go out and go get it in this meaningless world.
Bobby, if people want to know more about you, how can they find you?
Oh, that's a great question. I have a website, rvjamieson.com, but it doesn't have a lot on it. You can find me on Twitter/X, Bobby_Jamieson.
Okay.
Church website, trinitybc.church, and there's a kind of form email there. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you. This is the book. I'm really enjoying this. This is really good stuff. So appreciate your time, Bobby. Everything is never enough. Check that out.
Thank you both.
Yeah, thank you.